Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating FDA Cybersecurity Roadmap, Avoiding Pitfalls and Building Resilient Devices. We're so glad that you could join us. As medical devices become increasingly connected, cybersecurity has become a critical part of ensuring patient safety and regulatory compliance. Today's session will walk through how the FDA approaches medical device cybersecurity, including recent guidance updates, best practices for implementing a secure software development framework, and what manufacturers need to know about SBOMs, threat models, and other key deliverables in the submission process. So with that, I will turn it over to Ryan to kick off the introductions.
Hey, I'm Ryan Crookton. My background is in biomedical engineering with professional experience in R&D and manufacturing, as well as quality and regulatory, primarily supporting Class 2 medical devices through the 510(k) pathway. I work with Rook Quality Systems, and at Rook, we support companies of all sizes, from one-person startups to Fortune 500s. Our team is full of bright engineers and certified auditors, helping our clients win with quality and achieve regulatory compliance. It's a pleasure to be covering the critical topic of cybersecurity today alongside Ken, who is one of the foremost experts in medical device cybersecurity. So Ken, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Jacqueline. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to Rook for hosting today's webinar. And just real quick on me, thank you for the kind words there, Ryan. I am spent most of my career at I would say the crossroads of medical technology and cybersecurity, really helping device manufacturers in the med tech space, release safer, more secure products, leveraging the various tools and solutions that are available out there today. I started Vigilant Ops, a company specializing in software bill of materials lifecycle management, and we were recently acquired, I'm happy to say, by C2A Security, hence the background behind me there. Very excited. C2A's got an AI-driven product security platform. Together with our medical expertise, I really think we can do a good job helping med tech companies become more secure in their product development, alongside the innovative products that med device manufacturers are continually releasing, be more secure in those release processes and procedures. So I'm really happy to be here today and look forward to the discussion. So thank you.
All right, so today we'll start with a discussion on the FDA's role in medical device cybersecurity. We're going to provide some background on the intent of FDA's most recent guidance document released in June of this year, along with some best practices for implementing its recommendations. We'll also cover the experiences I've had seeing FDA enforce this guidance document. So Ken, you want to get us started on kind of the patient safety piece?
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I'll kick this off, and then as you said, we'll delve into a lot of topics here, but it seems a good place to start. So if you think about cybersecurity and cybersecurity and medical technology, I mean, we're all at the end of the day trying to make devices more secure and more safe for patients. I mean, at the end of every device, or the devices serve a purpose, which is interfacing with the patient at the end of the day. And the bottom line is to make those devices and systems as safe and secure as possible. Cybersecurity can't stand alone, let's say, as an exercise that we complete in the med tech world around just the security of the platform. That's got to be tied back into patient safety. And one of the things that FDA has made very clear, and they have been saying this for quite some time, it's not new in the guidance or anything, it's just tying that patient safety into cybersecurity is ultimately where you want to be as a device manufacturer. So I know a lot of device manufacturers are doing this today already. I think a lot of it is heavily manual, but you get a vulnerability in on a particular piece of software that's running in one of your products, and then you have to kind of go into the analysis and understand the impact on patient safety of that vulnerability. That analysis then ties back into the scoring of that vulnerability, the criticality when you patch it, and all kinds of things. So thinking about this, and one of the pieces of advice, maybe a takeaway from this, is to think about patient safety at the end of the day as being the most important thing that you're working on with respect to cybersecurity, and then always looking for ways to tie that analysis in, looking at the impact on patients at the end of the day of vulnerabilities. So I think it's really, really important to understand that and really kind of express this in the analysis that you're doing.
Yeah, and I'll add, if we don't know how secure the device is, we don't know how safe it is, kind of what Ken was just covering. When we're developing medical devices, this vulnerability severity and tying things directly to patient harm is really how we bridge people who maybe pigeonholed more into the security aspect of the device to the fact that we are developing a medical device for use with patients and with people, because people are at the center of what we're trying to accomplish here. And so some of the practical things that we've been doing is tying the vulnerability severity to a potential patient harm and not just the severity of the security vulnerability to the device. And then including a patient harm entry in security risk assessments. So similar to how at the outset of starting to do cybersecurity FMEAs or risk assessment documentation activities, we used exploitability instead of probability. So thinking about how each risk could be exploitable. We're trying to add patient harm back into those same documents to kind of complete the picture of a severity might be high, but how does that translate to the actual resultant patient harm or potential patient harm?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and I'd just like to follow up on Ryan's thoughts there because I agree with you 100%. And the idea, really behind this is also prioritization. There's another, benefit of scoring patient harm with respect to that vulnerability, and it enables device manufacturers to prioritize vulnerabilities because we all know that there are, I think we're up to more than 75 or so vulnerabilities introduced on a daily basis, not counting the hundreds of thousands that are out there already. So you think about as an engineer, you're getting inundated with these vulnerabilities continuously, and which ones are really impactful. And this is a good way to help you prioritize and look through the lens of impact of those vulnerabilities. Again, understanding how to go about fixing and patching these things in the most efficient manner. So I agree with you 100%. That was a good thought. Yeah. So I think this is one of the ways. So we just talked about all the things you should do. You say, you should bake patient harm into the analysis. You should think about these vulnerabilities, prioritize them, look at the criticalities and those things. One of the ways to think about creating secure products is to think about what FDA recommends in their guidance is an SSDF, or sometimes called an SSPF, but a secure software development or secure product development framework. And the idea behind that really is to say, if you're putting together a framework and you're putting together processes and policies that make you mindful of security as you're developing the product, then chances are likely you're going to come out with a more secure product at the end of that life cycle or at the end of that process. Again, it's FDA's common phraseology I've heard multiple times is, cybersecurity is not a bolt-on. It's a baked-in aspect of products. And so shifting left, so to speak, and thinking about security as far upstream as you can in your SDLC is your best bet, even coming out of the gate with respect to designing and developing products that are more secure and thinking ahead, thinking where you need to go with this product, where the product's going to end up, and then even beyond into the post-market phase where you're going to have to support the product. And you'll see a lot of that in the guidance as well as, how are you going to plan to patch and update? How are you going to monitor vulnerabilities? I mean, all those things get wrapped into what we're calling this secure development framework. But it really is just securing your life cycle, securing each phase along the way, and releasing more secure product by paying attention to security a little earlier in the process.
Yeah, and I would add to this, an implementation of this secure software development framework is including security requirements and everything in design controls. So similar to how you would have software requirements, having an individual section in your design inputs for security requirements. And then coming back to that, once we start executing some of our verification and validation activities. So if that's penetration testing, then we have security requirements that we're verifying in that penetration testing as an example, and then contextualizing those results to show the record of verification for FDA.
Right. The documentation of all of that is, as you mentioned, Ryan, really important. FDA having an understanding of the analysis that you went through is also extremely important. And so I think we'll get into this at some point later, but integrations with your quality management system are key. So understanding how documentation gets fed into your QMS and continuously updated, of course, as vulnerabilities continue to be discovered on a daily basis. So all that stuff comes into play. Again, this development framework encompasses the entire life cycle of the product, all the way through the post-market and even to end of life. So something to keep in mind as you're building up your processes internally.
All right. So I'd like to cover some common cybersecurity questions I've seen FDA ask, whether it's during interactive review on 510(k)s I've either participated in or led myself, or informal deficiencies in AINN letters, helping different clients answer some of those tough questions that they're asking. The common theme I've seen across submissions is that FDA has been very consistent. And consistency is a good thing from all of our perspectives as manufacturers and consultants and people developing medical devices, because that means that we have a firm baseline to work against as we develop technologies. So the first one is regarding cybersecurity controls. I've seen this in several different AINN letters, and FDA wants us to define and describe the cybersecurity controls we've implemented into our products in a very specific way. They list in their guidance documents several key terms, things like cryptography, authentication, authorization, update mechanisms, but they want us to consider all of these different aspects of how we might strengthen or improve the security posture of a device, and then describe them in detail. So when I say in detail, it's not just enough to say like we use encryption or we use password protection. FDA wants a justification of why the controls were chosen, including how they map to threats and vulnerabilities, how they're implemented, and then how we're assessing the effectiveness through verification and validation of those controls. So the other common issue I've seen on threat models is forgetting to assume adversarial networks and considering maintenance and update processes. So these are two big pieces. We'll talk more about threat models later, about common pitfalls, but these two pieces in particular I've seen across several devices that have been submitted. And the maintenance and update process is a big one, because especially if it's like a hardware device, if you're having service personnel going in and implementing updates or servicing devices, those people typically have enhanced levels of access to the device. And so that's a threat that needs to be considered in the product lifecycle, especially like once you get to the decommissioning point, like what do we do with data? Those are all things that need to be included in the threat model to ensure that we're adequately analyzing all of the threats pertinent to such a device. And then the last one is security assessment of unresolved anomalies. So software teams should be familiar with having to document unresolved anomalies in any software system. I've even had submissions where FDA asked for a timeline and milestones associated with resolving each unresolved anomaly. But what I'm talking about on this slide here is one step further, which is doing the security assessment of those unresolved anomalies. So if we have a piece of software that has an anomaly or a bug or some functionality that doesn't quite work correctly, does that introduce any security risk that could then potentially result in patient harm? So that's kind of the thought process FDA wants us to be following when we think about our unresolved anomalies from the security point of view.
Makes a lot of sense. And thank you, Ryan. I wonder, can you maybe want to expand a little bit on the adversarial? You mentioned adversarial networks, and especially we'll cover threat models a little bit later, but I wonder if it's worthwhile to expand a little bit on that, because I think there's some good thoughts around that, and maybe a little bit of I would see in some cases a little bit of a blind spot.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question, Ken. So for a device that might be connected to a hospital network, for example, it's our job as the manufacturer to assume that that network has adversarial control. So instead of assuming that all of the potential interactions our device is going to have are going to be perfect and go well, we need to assume that they might go wrong to design for the worst case scenario. So that like the hospital network being the network we're talking about here, and then adversarial control, assuming that there's some sort of threat actor on that network is really where we need to take the threat modeling activity and kind of the frame of mind when we're considering threats along that axis.
And exactly, that's exactly the point that needs to be made. I echo that. And the reason I brought that up also is because I think in a lot of cases, this is a little bit backwards thinking for medical device manufacturers. You think about in the medical device world, we've been designing and developing devices to be safe and to be from a safety perspective. We've got all kinds of systems built up internally to manage and to monitor safety and patient safety. But this kind of flips it on its head a little bit with respect to assessing the functionality of those devices. Now you kind of think as an adversary might think, right? You're not thinking about what you can do with your device. You were thinking about what people might do with the device that you haven't thought of. And so I've seen a lot of device manufacturers get a little bit tripped up in that space where they try to kind of enumerate and kind of almost kind of go out on that put their black hat on, so to speak, and start to think ways that they could be adversaries against the device. And it just requires that kind of starting early, understanding the design and development of the platform, the product that you're building, understanding how it, to Ryan's point, how it's deployed on the hospital network, the various network communications that are happening, and then on top of that, who can access it and the authentication controls and things. And again, flipping it on its head, saying, okay, if I'm a bad actor, how could I mess this up in a sense? And so again, it's like a little bit of backwards thinking or a little different thinking. And so it's good to start thinking about that early in terms of the product security. So it's a good point. Thank you.
All right. So for the SBOM, Ken, do you want to kind of talk about some common SBOM problems that happen since you've been really deep on SBOMs for so long?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Happy to do that. So let me start off with a little history. So I kind of think back to 2017, 2018, around that time frame, when I actually started to talk to FDA about SBOMs, and SBOMs were starting to become something that was of interest. I think NTIA at that point had started a healthcare SBOM proof of concept that I was involved with, or pilot program. And there were just a small handful of participants, and we were looking at, making at SBOM an actionable security document for medical devices. And lo and behold, 7 years, 6 years later, FDA's final guidance requiring SBOMs, lands, and then along the way, FDA got legislative authority to require software bill of materials. So everybody is, and when I say everybody, everybody in the regulatory space and especially in government as well, U.S. government, are counting on the software bill of materials as being a document that can really communicate the risk level, potential risk level in these systems. What I've seen, and we start from the various problems around generation of SBOM. I mean, it's even that basic still. I still see problems around generation of SBOMs, including the appropriate information, the multiple levels that you need if you have dependencies and things like that. There are tools out there, and folks are getting better. There are open source tools, and as I mentioned, Vigilant Ops had made SBOM automation tools that allow generation of SBOMs and things. But the idea is still to start with something good, start with a solid base. So that means making sure your SBOMs are complete. Making sure that you've got the information in there, you're adhering to the standards. So there are standards out there, like if you're working with SBOMs, you've heard of SPDX and CycloneDX as being the two most popular. There are others that folks have used, but sticking with one of those formats is a good way to communicate with FDA, making sure that you're adhering to those standards that are implied by those formats. And those formats expect specific types of information and specific information to be in there. You'll know if you don't have a complete one. You can use tools that help you generate those and make them complete. Also, there's the NTIA minimum elements. And if you look at, and the NTIA published a document a couple of years back recommending the specific information that needs to go into the SBOM, and information like the vendor and the version and the various end of life information and things like that they'd want to include as with the SBOM. And again, those are things to make the SBOM kind of base level acceptable. So get the right information in there, adhere to the standards, and make sure you're being complete in terms of your coverage. That's kind of step one. Once you've got that done, you're kind of onto this. How do I then use this SBOM? How do I monitor this SBOM? How do I monitor vulnerabilities? Again, this isn't a once and done exercise, as we all know. Cybersecurity is ongoing. So you create the SBOM, you generate it somehow, you make sure it's complete. And then you look at monitoring the vulnerabilities against the components that you're using. And a lot of folks are doing that manually. I mean, there are tools that exist. Again, I go back to the automation tools that we've built and others that enable you to do this generation and monitoring in an automated way. But looking at the vulnerabilities that are popping up and then tying those back into your systems or devices is the next big piece of this. And FDA wants to know that you're doing that right out of the gate. So if you look at the pre-market guidance, and I find this interesting. I kind of talk about this with a lot of device manufacturers that pre and post market is being kind of rolled together because cybersecurity and security of devices has a life cycle that's much faster, or a cycle time that's much quicker than product development, right? So you can put a device version of a specific device out into the field, and you might change that quarterly if you're doing quarterly software releases. But cybersecurity is happening way faster than that. You're getting vulnerabilities popping up on a daily basis. And so you have these two cycle times that are out of sync. And so the way to do that is you need a plan to say, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to monitor the vulnerabilities that are popping up on a daily basis. And here's how we're going to push that information into our product lifecycle so that we can patch and make things more secure on the product lifecycle release schedules that we're working on. Again, FDA wants to see that information, wants to understand you've got a plan to monitor how you're going to go about that, how you'll patch devices once they're in the field, how quickly you'll patch and things like that. So again, start with the SBOM, work your way into monitoring, put a plan together to monitor continuously, and then work through that product life cycle so you can get patches out there quickly enough. Third-party components are a big piece of a lot of this because device manufacturers use a lot of third-party components. I mean, we're not writing our own databases or our own operating systems, and we're using either open source or third-party commercial components. They all have their own vulnerability life cycles, right? In various stages, these components are more susceptible to vulnerabilities than others. If you're in between security patches, for example, on a specific component version, you may have more vulnerabilities popping up at that point that you have to deal with. So the idea behind that, again, is vetting a lot of the vendors. And I know a lot of folks are doing this today. In the kind of say in the old days, we would look at third-party vendors and look at their products in a certain way, that how they would fit into our product and the life, expected life of those products and things. Now we look at those components a little different. We look at security. We look at the security posture of the vendor themselves to see how they fit into our compliance landscape. Understanding up and down that supply chain, we need to have the most secure components going into our product to make our product most secure. So again, having lots of tight policies, good procedures around third-party components and vetting those components for security risk is a big must up front. The other thing I would say is, another piece of advice is, if you can get your vendors, especially the software component vendors, to provide you SBOMs out of the gate with those with the components you're including in your product, it's very helpful. You can pull those in, monitor those as well, and then make sure that that vendor is continuously updating those, just like you're being asked to do for FDA. You should ask your vendors to do the same thing. Update those SBOMs as you continually roll forward. Make sure the vulnerabilities are up to date. Make sure that your vendors are trustworthy, that they're releasing security patches in a timely manner. They're handling critical vulnerabilities in a timely manner. Again, because at the end of the day, your customers are expecting you to provide that same service to them. So the couple of things that I see out of the gate there is just documenting all of that, making sure that your analysis is crisp and clear, making sure FDA understands how you're going about all of that, how you're generating, how you're monitoring, how you're releasing patches, how you're vetting third-party vendors as well. Ryan, love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think the continuous monitoring piece in the post-market sense is really important because it's kind of a shift in mindset, because a lot of device life cycles are the big build-up to a submission, whether it's a 510(k) or some other submission type. And in that kind of a frame of thinking, especially for smaller companies, smaller teams, and startups where it's like a single device or a second device, it's easy to get caught up in, we do these things once to generate the documentation for the submission, and that's like the piece of the process that they're getting so familiar with. But then once you achieve that regulatory clearance or approval, now you do have to go into that continuous living out of these processes on a day-to-day basis. And so I think the kind of highlighting that shift in mindset is really important. So we're not doing the SBOM creation once. It's make the SBOM so that we know what to monitor continuously, and then do the penetration testing and then do it again. Or like looking at cybersecurity metrics. Once we identify a vulnerability is super severe and critical and needs to be patched, what's our time to patching that? So yeah, monitoring those things, like building that into a cybersecurity management plan is super important, and things that FDA definitely wants to see as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And maybe just to play off that a little bit, because I love what you said at the end there, building that into your plan. I mean, again, it goes back to kind of thinking about these things earlier is better, right? I mean, especially if you've got a small team and you're, to your point, working on one product, you're working really, really hard on getting that submission together, putting the documentation to kind of clear that hurdle. But really, the work is just beginning with respect to keeping that product fielded. You got to continuously maintain that level of security on that system, that device that you just released. And the way to do that is to kind of bake that in up front and not be surprised with it after you've done the release and say, oh, now I've got all this work to do to just keep it on the market, right? Kind of think that through up front. Again, I think it's helpful as a manufacturer, even up in the design and development phase, if you can do it even then in the earliest phases, start to think about security. It'll help you build that plan, to Ryan's point, in a crisp way that it can be implemented and continuously improved and made more efficient as you go forward. It's a great point.
All right, so just to kind of build on some of the detail that Ken provided on SBOMs, and thanks for that deep dive, Ken. Especially you are one of the foremost experts on SBOMs and introducing them with FDA and then building them into the guidance. So I think it's really, really helpful and special having you as a resource on this stuff today. But the SBOM, in terms of putting it into your pre-market submission, the purpose of that is really to serve as one of the pieces of objective evidence that we're following a secure product development framework or secure software development framework. Of course, it is required by FDA, and that is to show them that like we've chosen secure software packages that aren't riddled with vulnerabilities. We've gone through the thought process of the end of support date, end of life date. We're not choosing software that's no longer supported. It forces you into the process of asking those questions earlier in the development cycle of I want to use like OpenCV or something for like a machine learning application. Like, is that still supported? Is it does it have tons of vulnerabilities? Is it going to be updated soon with security patches? Yeah, like taking that extra look into the supply chain of your software is really the purpose here, and having it in the pre-market review process is critical for helping us as manufacturers build the muscle of thinking that way about our software packages, libraries, and components. And then the term that, so Ken was talking about the minimum pieces that have to be in the SBOM. NTIA calls those baseline attributes. And so those baseline attributes include the author name of the SBOM, the timestamp of when it was generated so that we know who did it and when and how recent it has been done. And then on each software component, you include the supplier name, the component name, the version string, unique identifier in your build, and relationship to the device or the architecture, kind of what it does in your product. And then the component hash is a last but optional baseline attribute. But those are the attributes that we're talking about when we say SBOM. Like, that's the meat of the SBOM. That's really what's in this document.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, thank you for enumerating the minimum elements there. And I know that there's a little bit of confusion, or maybe not confusion, but FDA also looks for end of life, end of support for various components and things. And I know manufacturers sometimes struggle with that, especially with third-party components. So one thing to keep in mind there is it's best effort. So the best you can do on understanding end of life or end of service or support for components is what you'd want to communicate there. So don't let that trip you up, especially in the third-party component land. You may not be able to get 100% accurate information from your vendors, but do the best you can to include what you can there and make notes with respect to the end of life and end of support. But those are all good points. The other thing I wanted to say just following on that, and a little bit of a segue into another area that I've seen kind of over time that it kind of trips folks up as well, is this kind of full visibility into software components and understanding the cybersecurity risk across the board for medical devices is applicable to practically everybody at this point in the medical device space that's building product. And I say that because if you look at 524B and the kind of the update that just came out, I think in March 2024 from FDA, that expands this. Well, what's known as a connected device, or a device that's a cyber device, as FDA calls it. It's practically everything at this point. And I've seen also manufacturers make the mistake of, well, we have this device that doesn't connect to the, or doesn't connect to the network, or can only connect if you use a USB, or something goofy like that. And they say our risk, we don't have any risk. And so that's a really dangerous place to go. You don't want to say that you don't have any risk. So I would caution with manufacturers who are saying, well, we only have this one product that has these minimal uses. You still want to update and provide that documentation to FDA with respect that you've done the analysis, you understand where the risk is, and a better answer is to say, we've minimized the risk because of these controls, and as Ryan pointed out, the compensating controls and things that you're including will help convey that message. But again, just another thought that popped in my head when Ryan was saying that is, don't assume that you have no risk in your product, and that you can just tell FDA that our plan, we don't really need to have a cyber plan because we don't have any cyber risk, because that won't cut it most likely. I think we want to touch on we talked pre-market, and we kind of talked about SDLC and kind of baking all this into your processes as you design and develop the product. Let's talk about SBOMs in the post-market world. So you've got SBOMs providing information, and it seems kind of common sense just from an engineering perspective. I'm going to detail all the components, the software components in my device as I build the product. Once it's out in the field, how can an SBOM help you there? Well, there's lots of post-market benefits of SBOMs once the device is fielded. First of all, you understand if you've got an SBOM for a fielded product, especially one that you've just released, right? And you push that out the door to your customers. You should know based on the SBOM what each customer is running with respect to software components and security patches and those kind of things. If you're able to maintain that over time, that what I would call detailed inventory, if you will, of those components, you have this clear, visible path with all of your customers, understanding where they are with various security patches and various software components. Devices drift, and we see that over and over again in med tech space, that whatever security patches get applied or they don't get applied, you can't get on the schedule at a hospital to apply your software update, and so there are times that the multiple devices from the same manufacturer and the same exact product are not running the same versions of software. And so there's that kind of disparity. Understanding that disparity at an SBOM or component level is extremely helpful, especially for field service folks who are going out and supporting those devices. So you understand when you lift up the hood what's running in that device. If you can generate an SBOM for that device while you're out there in the field, that's even more beneficial. So you can now you can do that and pull those components back and understand how that device, if it has drifted from the original manufacturing spec, so to speak, or if there are patches you need to apply. So from a post-market perspective, that's very big from a field service perspective, supporting the device and also helping commercially to understand where your customers are. I think another huge aspect from the post-market side is also understanding, helping your customers get visibility into what's running on their network. So hospitals in the med tech space have been asking for SBOMs from device manufacturers for quite some time, for a number of years. And I know big hospitals, the larger hospitals, have thousands of SBOMs they've collected from their vendors over the past couple of years. And they're looking at those, they're making them actionable, they're using those to understand the risk profiles of their devices that are on their networks. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense from a hospital perspective. Prior to an SBOM, these devices are literally black boxes that are being deployed on their network. When a vulnerability hits, like another WannaCry, which happened in medtech a little while back, the hospitals, especially back then, this was 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe more than that. I think it's 2017. So you think back that long, you think about hospitals were picking up the phone, calling vendors saying, am I vulnerable? Because they didn't have access to this information. They didn't understand at the component level what was running on their systems. And now SBOMs give them that transparency. So again, supporting from the customer side, having that knowledge, having that SBOM is really, really critical. And the last thing I'll say, before I'd love to hear Ryan's comments as well, is IMDRF, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, released a document on legacy device in med tech. And we all know legacy is an issue, and in some cases, legacy, or in some circles, legacy is actually a bad word. I mean, we're using it to mean a device that's older or that's multiple generations old, and it exists out there in the sense that these are running maybe outdated software components or components that haven't been patched. Right? IMDRF in their document on legacy devices recommends SBOM as a communication mechanism to support these legacy devices. So we know in a lot of cases, device manufacturers build a life cycle for their devices, X number of years, but most of the time they're in use for more than X number of years in the hospital. And so you have this gray area where device manufacturers don't want to spend a lot of time and effort to support those devices because, hey, why don't you just upgrade to the next version? But at the same time, we know we have a responsibility to support those. And we kind of came to this least common denominator call and said SBOM is a good document to provide in those cases. It's not super expensive to do from a device manufacturer's perspective. If you're maintaining those anyway as part of your process, you can provide those to customers on those legacy systems and help them protect themselves as well. So another good use case in the post-market world for SBOM. But love to hear you. I'll stop there, Ryan. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think providing the SBOM to the hospital networks just made me think of how much FDA talks about transparency in the cybersecurity guidance as well. Because as a manufacturer, it's easier to think of the end user as the physician or the patient who may be using your device. But in reality, the end user also includes the healthcare system, the hospital network, the network administrator, whoever that might be that your device might be connecting to. So transparency for the end user in that sense is the hospital network where they're asking for the SBOM and they have to make their own, risk assessments of what's going on their network, and then having potentially, inter-device interoperability if you're potentially interacting with other devices on the network too. So that was just the thought that came to my head on this one.
It's a great point because we'll probably I think we talk about that later when we talk about the various views that FDA recommends in the pre-market guidance. But one of them is multi-patient harm, and you brought up the network there, and that a device on the network that can have that can affect multiple devices through one vulnerability, for example, is something FDA cares a lot about. Again, at the end of the day, it's about patient safety and patient harm. So you think about that network and understanding, giving the hospitals transparency into that is a big ticket item and really big to hospitals. And I think also helps all of us, I say as an industry, become more proactive around the response to these vulnerabilities. So the quicker the hospital knows, the quicker we can know as a manufacturer, and the quicker we can get a security patch out there. So I mean, I think it's a cyclical thing, and we're all in the same ecosystem. The bottom line is providing that transparency through the SBOM is a good way to get that kind of communication started and kind of keep it going as well.
All right. So we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit here from the SBOM discussion and move into some real world cybersecurity challenges that Ken and I typically face. I'm going to cover threat models, and Ken is going to cover the cybersecurity views that we should be including in both pre-market submissions and in post-market support and maintenance of our software devices in the field. So the first one being in threat models. So the two kind of big ideas here, but I'll add a few more as well, is not including the end-to-end medical device system. So FDA talks about the medical device system being inclusive of like the front end, the back end, the network, everything that the medical device interacts with throughout its life cycle being the system. And so when we think about the life cycle here, we're thinking about implementation or installation of a device, ongoing maintenance and update processes, and then decommissioning. And so in a threat model, if we identify a threat as decommissioning, we're going to retire the device. We have some supply chain components there. Maybe we had a cloud server handling patient data. That's like not a sufficient description in a threat model of that scenario, because we need to define what that patient data constitutes so that we know what kinds of risks are attributable to that situation in a lot more detail and more specificity. It's also important. So we've talked about patient safety being equivalent to security a lot in this talk so far today, but threat model is not the place to do that. This is a threat analysis, and it's not a hazard analysis. Hazard analysis is a separate process, right? Threat analysis is really about the security piece, and we will tie in patient safety later. after this process. But the other piece on the end-to-end medical device system I wanted to cover is the installation process. So do we need like any kind of facility access or network access to configure our device on a network? Being in touch with network administrators about that process, then who has permission to our device when we do that step of installation? These are the types of things that we need to include in a threat model. And when we define our assets and our different threat vectors in that model and diagrammatically as well. And then the other one is the all threat model elements not making it into the cybersecurity risk assessment. So I mentioned that this is a threat analysis. The cybersecurity risk assessment is where we want to tie in that patient harm element. And if we don't have all of our threat model elements making it to that step, then we haven't adequately addressed the full patient safety impact of our cybersecurity posture of the device. And so I've seen this happen a lot where in the pre-market review cycle, whether it's interactive review or through resolving deficiencies, we might go through a few iterations of the threat model where we make updates, we add elements, we add threats, but then the cybersecurity risk assessment doesn't get updated in concert with that to include the newly added threats. And then therefore our cybersecurity risk assessment is all of a sudden out of date. So it's really important to keep these two steps kind of together, although they are slightly different ways of thinking about these risks.
Yeah, I love that, and I'd like to add a little bit of that to what Ryan said. I agree with you 100%, and I think a part of the difficulty in keeping those in sync, to your point, Ryan, is that they're separate processes today, right? I mean, you think about kind of the ongoing cybersecurity monitoring and vulnerability analysis, and the threat modeling as being kind of like an input to that, but it's a separate analysis that folks are doing, and a lot of the alignment has to happen manually. And so I've seen a lot of device manufacturers struggle in that area, to your point, and keeping up and keeping things up to date because of that. There are some automation and tools that pull those together, and I'm happy to say that we at C2A do that as well. But the idea is to kind of pull all that data together and provide a more robust risk profile that would include that continuously updated threat model. So I'm right there with you. I think that the struggle today is that the most manufacturers are just not kind of pulling that data together in a way that's efficient, and so you kind of get these out of sync steps. So it's a great point. Yeah, so thanks Ryan for covering the threat modeling, and so I will cover the cybersecurity views. We talked about a lot of this already, I think, in the discussion, but just to say, formally speaking, these are the views. If you pull out the pre-market guidance from FDA, you'll see FDA recommending these 4 views, and sometimes folks get tripped up on this, and I can tell you kind of the areas where some of the confusion maybe comes in. So let's go through them one at a time and kind of clarify a little bit. So if you look at the global system view, this is just what we've talked about before, understanding in essence where your device, your product is going to be deployed, what that network looks like, what are the data flows, all the way down to where's the hospital encrypting data? Is it to and from your system? Are you storing data on your system that would have an impact if it were breached? Those kind of things. Understanding that just overall view, and it's a little confusing because these are networks that you don't control, and you can't even specify, right? As a device manufacturer, you're going in and you're saying, here's where our device runs best. And you should have those requirements laid out, and I'm sure you do, with respect to the instructions for use, and the specific technical details on deployment of your device should include things about encrypting data and expectations of the network. But again, you can't make those assumptions up front. And so you need to think about this kind of going into it, and mapping that out ahead of time, as FDA is saying, having this global system view is really important and help you kind of get there. Multi-patient harm we talked about already with respect to devices on the network. I mean, this is a fact of life that, and I think I ran these numbers a few years back, but it was probably 5 years ago that I was counting at least 15 connected devices in every hospital room on average. So we're probably way over that at this point. No device wants to be disconnected. Everybody wants to be connected. So you think about that, right? You have this opportunity for multi-patient harm. I mean, you take a vulnerability and you take out a whole this slew of pumps, infusion pumps or something. And so you need to understand this up front. And this requires that thinking a little bit more beyond the device itself and beyond the device function. You need to think about now, this is a network device communicating with other devices on the network, passing information back and forth. How do I think of this with respect to a bad actor taking control of this device and then kind of getting control of other devices through this specific device? And so understanding that multi-patient harm is a facet that sometimes trips folks up as well, because they're kind of not used to thinking that way. Think in a broader perspective. How can this device be compromised, and how can that compromise lead to compromising other devices on the network? And how can I prevent that, or how can I at least track that, monitor it, and report it? And so that multi-patient needs to be taken into account. Updatability and patchability is really going back to your having that secure product development or secure software development framework. Understanding from the very beginning, you're baking security into this device. So you're going to need to know how to update it, monitor it, and update that device in the field. When vulnerabilities hit, first prioritizing them internally, but then how quickly can I get those out to my customers? What are the paths of the update? So FDA wants you to say, here's how we're going to push updates and patches out to the customers, down to the metrics. And if you look in the FDA pre-market guidance, you'll see the metric requirement of how quickly, basically, did you get those patches out to all of your customers. We know that customers can't be patched simultaneously for a lot of reasons. Even if you could control that on your end, there's still a lot of scheduling nightmare you're going to run into on the consumer side. Hospitals with those specific devices, the device might be in use, for example, and you can't patch then. So, they got to go on hold and you can't patch it. So you've got this disparity. So the FDA wants to know not only how you're responding to them, so what's your update path and your security path and getting patches out there, but in addition to that, how quickly you're getting them out there and how quickly you're getting them out to all of your devices. And so that's really important. And again, thinking through that up front is very helpful. Not trying to do it at the end and saying, oh, wow, we should have thought of that, and we should realize, this is going to not be tenable. We need to think about it up front as we're designing the platform, designing the product, bake some of that stuff in to security. And then the last thing I'll say is just kind of this security use case, which basically says, again, I'm looking at these, when we talked about risk assessments earlier, I'm looking at cybersecurity different from patient safety, because now I'm a bad actor. I want to put the black hat on and look at these cyber issues that could impact my device. How can somebody take control of my device? How can they take it out of the mode that I'm thinking it should be in for interaction with clinical personnel, and nefariously take over the device, right? And so you got to think then, as a bad actor, what are the various use cases? What are the scenarios that I can go through that would enumerate this view? And again, be as clear and as descriptive as you can. Understand the impact of all of those cases on your specific device, how they impact the device. And again, there's a common thread that's weaving through all of this. These all have to tie together in your SDLC. So understanding the ecosystem as part of your requirements, understanding the patient harm across multiple devices and how it can be compromised, updating, and also the security use cases. Again, all woven together into that secure life cycle. Ryan, I'd love to hear your views as well.
Yeah, I would just add, especially if your team is following like an agile development framework and you're doing continuous improvements and continuous development, that updatability and patchability view is going to be pretty critical there, because you might have a lot more frequent rollouts or updates, and then having like requirement timelines tied to those updates would be one of the ways that you could implement like a more secure way of getting those updates rolled out and making sure everyone, all the fielded devices are more or less on the same footing from a security standpoint.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially from an agile perspective. And I know, with software development today and software as medical device and SIMD, SAMD, and folks getting product out there more quickly or on different release cycles. Yeah, being on an agile in an agile framework and kind of keeping up, as Ryan said, with this as you roll forward is really key. So that's a great point. Yeah. So I think, and Ryan is welcome to chime in on this as well. But so we talked about this a little bit before, maybe touched on the QMS, I think. But thinking about cybersecurity as part of your quality processes is really important. And at the end of the day, you're going to have a kappa, or you're going to have to respond to vulnerabilities in the field that are going to trigger a kappa. I mean, and so these processes kind of all have to be tied together and unified with respect to cybersecurity and your quality processes. So as a device manufacturer, you've got lots of quality processes in place today. A lot of times, unless unless you've been thinking about this for a little while, you haven't baked in security as much as it needs to be integrated into those quality processes. I know a lot of integration into QMS systems is still very manual. I know that, and again, Ryan mentioned this earlier, you get these out of sync documentation, right? That you've got cybersecurity happening in the outside world, so to speak. Your documentation that you submitted to FDA is snugly residing in your QMS, but manually being updated kind of when you get around to it, right? And that's something you need to think about going forward, that those processes need to be tied together and aligned in a way that allows this kind of automation to happen. And I know there are some QMS systems out there today that are talking about SBOMs, and there are lots of tools like ours that can integrate with QMS systems, again, to make your job easier. But the idea behind that is, as the cybersecurity vulnerabilities evolve, your QMS documentation that you're submitting to FDA can't stay static. It's got to continuously update. And so you got to plan for this. Again, I know I said it 100 times and I sound like a broken record, but if it's the only thing you take away from this, I'm happy that you look at cybersecurity as kind of upfront things you need as part of this device manufacturing process that you're baking in. Just as common as safety is to you today, security should be as well. And then think about all of these, even the end of life of that product up front, and help you to integrate that into your quality system, and then keeping that documentation continuously updated. Ryan, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think just practically speaking, like a few integration pieces, Ken, you mentioned kappas, and with the kappa process, we have the verification of effectiveness step. I think practically in that one, just adding another question, whether it's like a module-based thing or a paper-based system in your forms or processes of like, does this verification of effectiveness or implementation of this fix impact device cybersecurity at all? Yes or no, and then do a separate assessment for that. Similarly, in a change control process, again, whether it's like a paper-based form or it's a module in an eQMS platform, finding a way to add in an assessment of cybersecurity into that process so that you're always having to check yes or no and think about the impact there, similar to how risk management is typically baked into those processes as well. So yeah, that's my recommendation for integrating cybersecurity into the quality processes practically.
Excellent. I think, we are. Okay, so we're on to the questions. I saw a question, if you don't mind, I'll jump in with the first question. Somebody asked, which I think is a great question. Are there any AI tools? So actually, we made it all the way to this point in the webinar without saying AI, I think. So that's amazing. But anyway, are there any AI tools for managing SBOMs for ongoing vulnerability impact? I think that's a great question. And yes, and I'm happy to say, and C2A. The platform is an AI-based platform that will help you do all of that, combined with Vigilant Ops SBOM lifecycle management. I think is a real strong contender to help you there. But in general, what AI can help you with, just generally speaking, from an SBOM perspective, is understanding. First of all, linking vulnerabilities to components, which we know is a difficult problem. There's complexity around the naming conventions and things like that we won't get into. But the idea behind that is using AI in some form of matching to get those links accurate. And so you're looking at vulnerabilities for your products. That's the first thing. And then understanding the dependency of those software components is something else that can be helped out with. So if you haven't looked at dependency trees or dependency analysis, which if you're deep into this on the engineering side, chances are you know exactly what I'm saying. But look at how these components impact each other, where they are in the software tree, so to speak, and understanding their impact. If there's a vulnerability at a low level in the tree, and the way back, the path back to the root is impactful to other components, you'll want to investigate that. AI can help you with that, ferret out those dependencies as well. So a couple good areas to help you with on AI. So thank you. That's a great question.
Yeah, I see one kind of shifting over to the pre-market side, asking about do we need to prepare an SBOM in two formats, machine readable format and another in a table or CSV for human review? And the answer to that is yes. FDA does say in the guidance and in the eStar template itself to provide both. And that's again important because like if it's a big organization requesting this, they might just have an automated tool to take it in and analyze all of them. So that's where the machine readable might come in handy. And then if it's an individual, that's where the human readable comes in handy. And then I see another question on, we've talked a lot about like hospital networks and being in a larger organization, but the question here is, are there different considerations for home use devices? And are requirements for home use devices easier or require less threat modeling than those used in a hospital environment? And that's kind of one of the benefits of considering the adversarial controlled network, because we're not assuming that there's any safety to being on the hospital network versus a home network. There are some unique threats to the home environment because it's not as access controlled physically. So you can have anyone showing up at your house, right? And there's also like other potential threats, like other wireless communication pathways, if those might exist in your device. But in general, in terms of like the network connectivity, I typically consider those in a similar manner, just assuming adversarial control of the network.
That's great. Yeah. I think maybe there was maybe one more. We have just 2 minutes, and one of the questions I saw was how frequently are device manufacturers making security related updates, and has that changed much over time? I would say the requirements are based on the criticality of vulnerabilities. You'll see that in FDA guidance, but manufacturers are looking to get more efficient and more aligned with requirements in getting out security patches. And I've seen that improve a lot over time. And again, it goes back to thinking about this ahead of time, baking it in up front, having these plans to monitor and patch well ahead of post-market. So good question, and I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much, Ken and Ryan. That was such an insightful discussion. And thank you to everybody in the audience for joining us today. We really hope that this session gave you a clear understanding of the FDA's cybersecurity expectations and that you gained some practical ways to strengthen your development, quality, and risk management processes. And so thank you for spending part of your day with us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.